So maybe you can start, Stephen, by telling us a little bit about your own professional journey and what brought you to this latest iteration of now Fairfax House.
Sure. So I used to sell Hellmann's mayonnaise, and I'm sure some people love doing that. I'm sure that's a really cool thing, but it wasn't working for me. And I was in the UK, and in the company magazine, I saw that a guy had just walked into a top-notch job in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey. And the strange thing was that I realized that there were about 10 stages professionally for me before I got there. I was a junior brand manager, and I'd be a senior brand manager, and then a European brand manager. And this guy, thanks to his MBA, basically shot through right to the top and got this plum job. And I'm like, I've got to go to the States. So I enrolled in an MBA program at BU, and then tried to get a job with Kraft or one of the Heinz, one of the big consumer foods outfits. And very fortunately, I failed to get any of those jobs. And as a result, I was invited, and Niles from Harvard Square, I think a couple of others here know Cambridge quite well. So on Mount Auburn Street, there was this little publishing outfit that was doing this thing called CD-ROM. And the guy running it, who founded a big consulting company called Apt Associates, said, hey, look, I'm looking for people who've got business expertise to help on tech. So in those days, a CD-ROM had 600 megabytes. And today that's not even a small USB stick. But in 1989, 600 meg was big, 250,000 pages worth of content. And he was really, really impassioned by the fact that Africa and developing countries were going to be able to get these vast libraries of historically old documents, and suddenly kind of have a level playing field, because they'd never been able to buy the books before and never been able to get the journals. And he invited me to join. So I did. And that business failed, but pretty much immediately after that, I joined a company called Silver Platter Information on a Silver Platter, which was a CD-ROM disc. And it was a good tag. It was like in Woven, it was a good tag. And it did really, really well. And I joined employee number 50, give or take, and didn't get demoted. And 7 years later, it was 350 employees, and I was running sales and editorial for the US. And I knew there's only so many ways you can write the back of a soup packet. There's no soup packets. It's my most successful publication. I actually wrote the blurb on the back of the Knorr cheese sauce, which is like three or four paragraphs, and it sold millions of copies. And so it was hugely successful. But after a while, you have this dictionary of words you can use to talk about it. But no, I knew within literally a few hours of working on CD-ROM, this is a fantastic thing to do. And really, what you do, Niles, and what you folk do here is fantastic. You're bringing technology to the service of people. And I know that sounds very kind of 50,000 foot, but there's nothing more fun than actually seeing a publication get propagated thanks to the way you've implemented it, thanks to the tech. So it's been a great journey.
That's great. And then so after the CD-ROM, was it Alexander Street was after that? Or?
Actually, so believe it or not, we actually got on the web in '92. It's a common misnomer that we didn't see the web coming. We did. And I think it's a really good lesson for people. You usually see it coming. It's not a question of we didn't see that. It's a question of we just couldn't react fast enough. And as a result, Silver Platter sold in late 90s, but I'd jumped ship. I'd actually moved to a company called Information Access Company here in the Bay Area, 800 employees. Their business was abstracting and indexing newspapers, things like the Wall Street Journal. And at that time, distributing a page of news was really tough. I mean, believe it or not, to build a single PDF page on your 286 or 386 machine was a matter of seconds. So, you know, if you want to see the Wall Street Journal without rekeying it and putting it in ASCII, it was going to take a long time. So what this company did was basically abstract it so you could see what was on the paper and then read it. And that was an okay business, but it was very large and quite corporate, and I didn't do well. I'm more of an entrepreneur, and after a year I got an invitation to run a company in Washington, D.C., which was into microfilm and thinking about going onto the web. So looking at the young faces here, I'm sure microfilm's like, you know, nether regions, but it's actually the precursor to what we all do today, because microfilm was the first medium where you could really publish a ton of stuff. You know, 22 million pages of microfilm. One of the company's products, for example, was the archives of the KGB. And the beauty of microfilm was that unlike tech, it doesn't need to be preserved in the same way. After you've made a film, providing you've got a reader, it's fine for hundreds of years. Whereas, as we all know, 5 years, 10 years, if you don't keep the tech evolved, the content will actually erode and become unusable. And soon after that, that got sold to a much larger company, ProQuest. And
we'll meet again later.
We'll meet again later. And I was left without a job. And I tried to get a job and once again failed. And it was kind of cool because I thought there was a real opportunity. I read an article in Scientific American by Tim Berners-Lee, The Semantic Web. And it's a 1999 article, and it's really seminal. And basically, it posited that the way the web was constructed was just not the right way. And it's constructed around documents rather than meanings. And it would be far better if there was an infrastructure of meaning. And what I noticed was that if one tried to do what Berners-Lee was suggesting doing programmatically, but if one used humans, one could actually create some very interesting products. So Alexander Street Press launched in 2000 with a collection called Women's Letters and Diaries. And it was 150,000 pages, which at the time was about the 10th largest database in our space. And the idea was to allow women's voices to be fully understood. And believe it or not, the leading bibliography, i.e. the list of books pertaining to women's history, from colonial times through to 1950, had about 1,500 entries. A scholar had compiled this bibliography. So 1,500 entries. Meanwhile, for male voices, in the Civil War alone, we stopped counting when we hit 8,000 volumes. So the Civil War was only 4 years. Basically, if you were a woman, you could not get yourself heard. And Alexander Street's mission was to make silent voices heard. So we kicked off with that database, and we added about 80 fields for every letter and every diary. So you could ask a question like, give me all letters written by women who've had more than 5 kids. And the cool thing about that was you could really, really start to see the emotion coming through. And academics were asking questions like, okay, if you had more than 3 kids and a kid died, do you express yourself differently? You know, is that different to a woman who just has 1 kid and that kid dies? Is it more emotionally intense, less emotionally intense? All kinds of studies were able to be done on that. And so that actually was a hugely fun and successful thing. Alexander Street, in our first year, we did 2 mil. We had sales to 20 charter customers, and pretty much the top colleges in the country, Stanford, Yale, Princeton, Harvard, UCLA, etc. And what they said was, look, we really like the silent voices heard. Yeah. We want you to find other areas where voices have been disenfranchised. So we did many, many different products. We found out that African American and Black authors, especially playwrights, had not been able to be published until about 1960. And we, with Skip Gates,
yes, Skip Gates.
We actually consulted various people, and we were able to identify about 1,200 plays, which we again indexed really, really richly. Now, plays, you think, okay, so that's performance, but actually plays are social documents. And what they are is emotional reenactments of experiences of humans. And yet they've never really been considered in that way. But when you index them right, it gets really, really cool. So anyone want to guess who the number one character across 1,200 African American plays was? Jesus. Jesus was number one. Huh. And number 2 is MLK. Okay. And number 3 is Toussaint L'ouverture. And I wonder how many of you here know who Toussaint L'ouverture is.
Maybe Elliot. Not because you're a black guy.
He was the leader of the Haitian slave revolt. And right there, you start to see, you can go into these collections and identify the most unbelievable scenes. First reenactment of a lynching in a play is like 1966. And just think what a big deal it is to ask somebody on stage to perform something that emotionally intense. It's a big, big deal. And you can actually plot out, okay, after that first one, it starts to go. And we were able to license top people, Amiri Baraka, Wale Shayenka, many, many people. And that product became so successful at UNC Chapel Hill, we once got a call, and usually our products got tried out, and then, for 30, 60 days. And then the librarian would say, okay, it's got usage, and, faculty like it. We got a call out of the blue from UNC Chapel Hill, and the Dean of Libraries was like, I'm going to have to buy Black Drama. And we're like, no trial? He's like, no trial, I just need to buy it. I'm like, really? And it turns out that a faculty member's precondition for joining the school was they needed Black Drama, because he found it so useful in teaching people about the African and African American experience.
That's huge in terms of value, right? When you talk about how something is valued by somebody and so forth. Also interesting that it seems like a lot of plays didn't make space for just the other things, like it had to be about such, emotionally generated topics.
Well, I think it's why there's a very nice synergy between what Inwoven is up to and what Alexander Street was up to. Because at the end of the day, it's about people. And, in colleges everywhere, tons of money is spent on the sciences, on engineering, on chemistry and physics. But much, much less is spent on people. And the real issue is that if you don't get the people right, it doesn't matter how good the science is. Both bad, as in, perverted science, but also just as in some of the greatest scientists in the world never got their inventions bought into by investors because they were unable to articulate their message. There's a very good case with Goodyear, who invented rubber. Yeah. And the guy had it for like 10 years and was trying to persuade people hey, I got this thing. It'd be a lot cheaper than harvesting it in Malaysia and so on. But he couldn't do it. Didn't know how to persuade people because he was an engineer and a scientist and hadn't been taught better how to articulate himself.
So Alexander Street grew, as
Yeah.
we know, and was there something that was it kind of just steady growth, or was there something that catalyzed the growth, or was it just, the mission of Silent Voices being heard led you, it seemed like it was a guiding principle
Yeah.
that helped led you to the next content that you would make available?
So I think part of the challenge is, and I believe you've discovered this as well, there's a complicated mix of serendipity, needing to take the advantages that present themselves to you, and mission. So our mission was very, very clear. We wanted to make Silent Voices heard. But about, 4 years into the company, a friend of mine let me know that a streaming music service that was actually pre-Napster and had pivoted to sell to libraries might be available for sale. And I thought, oh my God, what a fantastic thing. So if we wind the clock back to 2004, this is when MP3 players is pre-iPods. This is when MP3 players are not that great. Trying to get that going, iTunes maybe around that time. And I thought, wow, music, literally that's an audio voice. There should be something here. And so we acquired this company, classical.com. And very, very quickly were able to strike a deal with the Smithsonian. And the Smithsonian's got this unbelievable collection called Global Sound. And it is a catalogue of about 40,000 tracks of music from all over the world. I mean, Afghan tribesmen and Aboriginal natives and South African folk singers and drunken Scottish publicans. I mean, literally, they've got phenomenal political songs in Scotland. They have sounds of a Vietnam street in 1967, and you can hear the GIs arguing and lots of different sounds. So that also became a very successful collection. And after YouTube launched, I'm like, well, this is obvious, isn't it? I mean, video is going to go web. Why wouldn't it? Everything else I've seen has gone web. Video will go web. And today, of course, with Game of Thrones looking impeccable in 4K HD. But in those days, video was, the bandwidth was terrible. And the video was in a little box and with snow, and it looked really, really bad. But I was like, streaming's going to go. So let's start off with opera and theater, two pretty much underappreciated disciplines, and we'll produce the world's first database of opera in video for libraries, and the world's first database of theater actual performances for libraries.
Wow.
And those were two very successful products. And here is a lesson, because we were so early that none of the DVD guys thought there was much of a risk. So they were all licensing us their stuff very cheaply, very easily. They loved us because we were paying royalties, whereas YouTube wasn't. The trouble was that I didn't move quickly enough. And I was cautious. And so as a result, after opera and theater, I did counseling and therapy. I did various collections, religion, theater, various collections. But what I really should have done is created the all-time best academic video collection. And I didn't do that until 2011. And that delay allowed competitors to start to launch competing products. And as a result, I kind of lost some of the advantage we had.
I was going to ask you what you thought one of the biggest kind of mistakes were in the kind of successful. There was a lot of successes along the way. Was there, would that be one of the, you guys achieved the biggest mistakes or learning lessons?
It was definitely a learning lesson, because I'm not sure I realized at the time the gravity of the choice.
Yeah.
What I think most, though, is that overall one has a choice as a business, which is whether to stay true to one's mission. And the trouble with the video was that it wasn't really silent voices heard.
Yeah, it was academic.
It kind of began that way because there were a lot of things where it wasn't really silent voices heard. I was like, okay, there's an awful lot of money to be made in video. It will subsidize the rest of the business. I mean, the nursing collection, we did a nursing and video collection that did incredibly well. But really, that wasn't Alexander Street. We did engineering, we did many, many different disciplines. So the net result was that I think it kind of distracted us. And certainly to my disappointment, to kind of finish this trajectory in 2015, I was approached by the largest players in our space, companies called EBSCO and ProQuest and several others. And pretty much the message was clear. It was something along the lines of, look, you guys are number one in video. Video is going to be even bigger than it is today. We're going to go into video, and it would be a lot cheaper and faster for us to buy you than for us to build a competing product and build all your market share. So you don't have to sell to us, but if you don't, you need to know that we're kind of going to come after you. And that at the same time with investors saying, I had a couple of investors who reached 70 who were like, okay, we're kind of thinking about wanting some money out and going our separate ways. And so I felt that it was time to sell.
You guys were how big at that time? 30 million?
Yeah, we were about 30. We had about 140 employees. We were profitable every year, but it's less the money and more that we did really, really exciting things. Yeah. We did the first comics database. We did underground comics. So if you don't know, the Comics Code Authority here in the States basically said that all comics that were to be distributed in stores had to pass the Comics Code Authority because they were worried, much like video games today, that the youth was being poisoned by these comics. So what happened was half the industry ministered to that, and in the comics world, that's known as the Capes and Tights Brigade. So these are these fairly anodyne hero stories. And half the lot are like, hey, we're not going to get distributed except in plain paper, envelopes sent surreptitiously to people around the country. So there's no proper distribution. So, hey, we can say whatever we like. So it started being really political and really sexual, and all these emotions that humans have that have typically been kept beneath the surface by the publishing system, suddenly they flower. So there's enormous numbers of LGBT comics. And of course, nobody collected them at the time because it was kind of, you shouldn't be collecting this stuff.
No one told anything when they were...
Nobody, exactly. So that was a really, really great collection, and we contacted a lot of the authors who, this was in the middle thousands, and so some of the authors, one was really good. He's like a letter attached to copies of his comics. It's like, I hear you're going to put these in a computerized database. I never guessed when I was on Haight-Ashbury that this would happen. I wish you luck with it. Maybe you can make some money. I never did. And it was just, really, really cool to be taking this guy's stuff, which without us might very well have ended up, just getting chucked out with the trash. And now that collection sold in the hundreds. French guy introducing me just a few months ago was like, oh, this is the guy that did the weird underground comics database. And so it's like, yeah. So that was very cool. We did a counseling and therapy database where I thought, what is the most sacred interaction between humans? and it's not really between lovers, although that's hugely sacred. It's actually on the therapist's chair. That's when you totally reveal yourself. It was like, what if we could actually capture that? So this is what we were talking earlier about HIPAA. And everyone was like, HIPAA, 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 HIPAA. And I'm like, okay, I get it. HIPAA's really, really bad. What if we set up a process? And after much shenanigans, finally I got somebody at Beth Israel to agree to a process. This is in New York, Beth Israel Hospital. The process was that basically the therapist would send the tapes of the therapy directly to an agency that would transcribe them. And they do that fairly frequently anyway because they need the tapes transcribed for the paperwork and for them to be able, otherwise it just takes forever to understand the arc of a treatment. So, but instead of just transcribing it, we pay the agency to anonymize it. So they would go through and they would remove every reference to a person or a place. So if it was set in New York, let's say it was set in Chicago. And if the thing they were talking about was an opium overdose, they'd make it a heroin overdose. They'd change everything. Then they'd pass it back to the therapist, and the therapist would actually vet it. And then we'd get the files afterwards. And so we published the only collection I know of about 130,000 pages worth of actual therapy transcripts. And again, we had student feedback that was to die for cool, where a student basically sent us a letter saying, you know, I'm so sick of textbooks because they're always like so right, you know. And, you know, I'm 25 and I'm about to go to treat patients, treat clients, and I've got no clue what really goes on. But I can read your transcripts, and I see that even the really senior guys screw up all the time. And, you know, it just totally helps me to see, you know, just how one of these things really plays out in reality. So I'm saying these stories, but I hope you get a feel for, there's a lot of synchronicity here between what you're up to, I think. Humanness, making sure that the essence of people comes through, not just, you know, swamped by technology, but empowered by technology.
Oh, I was going to say there's two more questions. One being, what's the advice you would give to our team? It sounds like that's a little bit of, but is there anything else as we build and evolve and move in and now you're part of our journey to both as an investor and a board observer, but are there things that you think we should be taking into account or consideration as we build?
I can remember when Alexander Street was this size, and first of all, I really encourage you to enjoy the time. It sounds weird, but it just, as it gets larger, it gets more complicated. Sooner or later, you're going to hire some people who say they believe in the mission, but don't really believe in the mission. And those people, they don't wear, you know, I don't believe in the mission. They will talk exactly as you talk, but there will become times where calls need to be made. And they'll make a call, and you'll be like, that's kind of weird, doesn't really fit. And so I think you asked earlier about mistakes. I made so many mistakes, too many to mention. But amongst them, I think the things I'm proudest about is where we really followed through on the mission. And actually, the competitive advantage that Alexander Street had, although many people thought it was in video, it was really that we had a very sacred mission that nobody else was doing. And, you know, as Alexander Street continues on its journey, I wonder if that will continue. When I look on the outside, what convinced me that Inwoven was a great company and one well worth investing in? Many things, but walking in that door there and seeing what a human space you've got here, and, you know, just what a human place this is. Seeing your YouTube talk, where you get emotional and raw about things that happen to you. I think those are really, really important things. So when there's probably hundreds of companies doing web, corporate service development. What is your unique selling point? You know how important it is to talk human. Mm-hmm. It's not the fact that you've got some code or some... And by the way, I'm sure you'll get larger. And as you get larger, more and more people will think it's less and less about the people. Mm-hmm. But if you can stay true to that original thing, while of course money is really important. Mm-hmm. I think I mentioned earlier about the Washington Post. I have this distinct memory of going into the Post and seeing written on the wall, the first business of a free press is to make a profit, without which there is not a free press. And I like that a lot, because the other side of people is like, I can't believe the mission's being violated here. We're doing this incredibly, mundane piece of coding that doesn't talk to our mission at all. Yeah, but for us to achieve the mission, we've got to make enough money. And sometimes you just got to be expedient and make some money.
That's great. And then the last question we always ask, and I appreciate that, and we appreciate you being a part of this. And the last question I ask is, if you didn't do the job, if you could choose like a passion job that's not what you did, what would you have been or done? Or
well, Niles, I think I told you this already, because I live my passion.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I live my passion, and my wife's seriously unhappy about it. She was an accountant, and she's like, I can't believe how much you enjoy your job. I'm like, yeah, totally. Comics, movies, theater, literature, history. I mean, what's not to love? And all blended together with tech, and you get to travel the world and go into phenomenal archives. So I'd actually almost flip the question the other way, which is to say, if you're not doing the thing that makes you really actualize, then kind of, what are you doing? What are you doing? I mean, it's what life's about. We could all get hit by a bus tomorrow, and fingers crossed, and I don't think that's wood, but yeah, if it happens to me, at least I've got this feeling that I did some things that I'm really enjoyed and happy, and I've got kind of a notch on the thing of an achievement. And I mean it genuinely. I think you guys are on that trajectory. Everything here speaks about people that genuinely love and care about what they do.
On that note, I'll cheers to that.
Cheers.
Thank you, and cheers to all you guys. Thank you. Any questions from the audience? That was a pretty good... It's funny, because as you were talking about... Because I always ask that question at the end. As you were talking, I was like, wow, he's actually probably... He enjoys what he did. Like, the fact that you got to monetize that and actually make it a job is pretty cool, by the way.
I think it's... I don't know how you correlate this, but if you really love something, over and over again, I see people who make money despite themselves just because they're so passionate and so good at what they're doing. And meanwhile, people who kind of put their, I've got to make money kind of thing, go be lousy accountants and lousy product managers or lousy engineers because their spirit is completely divorced from the work. If you saw that movie Up in the Air, you've seen that movie Up in the Air, that's a really, really good movie. Needs to be annotated, that movie.
Any questions from anyone? Yeah.
So you spoke about video and kind of seeing video coming online before it fully hit. Right now, 3D immersive video is something that is emerging. People trying to figure out, what devices it could get watched on and where it's going to be relevant. When you think about that and kind of unheard voices, what do you think will be the kind of impact in the next 5 years?
What a great question. What a great question. Love that. So I think, look, in history, what we're trying to do here is recreate the past, right? So let's just go crazy. I mean, Star Trek had it with the holodeck. You just have everything like all unfolding. But what I see most today is focus on the devices. So let's just wind the clock back. So did it really matter if you looked at the web on a 286, a 486, a Mac, or whatever, a Unix box? It didn't really matter. What matters is the underlying content. So there's actually a really, really good series of simulations that were created in Second Life. And the funny thing about Second Life is they baked the objects into the operating system. So there's something called Virtual Harlem in Second Life. And Virtual Harlem is unbelievable. It's a recreation of 1920s New York, complete with cars, instrument music, people, buildings, the whole 9 yards. But it's stuck in Second Life in 2D and hasn't been able to be moved easily and open a source code that would actually allow these objects to be used. What's worse is that because the whole thing was baked together, the individual objects could have been used elsewhere. They've got a 1925 caddy. Well, that 1925 caddy could actually be used in an exhibit on history of Cadillac. But no, it's baked in that particular thing. So I am a huge believer. Unfortunately, I bought a Rift about 2 years ago. My son, I've actually got a photo of him with red marks because he plays the thing so much. It's like a tan. It covers his eyes. We've got through like 6 iterations of the plastic rubber thing you buy to go on top of it. But he's 15 and he so likes the VR. He's living in the VR. He's interacting with his friends in VR. So you're right on the mark. I think VR is a huge, huge next step for us. But the distraction is, I don't think anybody in this room is going to influence the devices. There's probably like 5 people on the planet that are going to influence the devices. But the underlying content, the digital artifacts that comprise the VR experience, that's wide open, and we create lasting 3D objects to play in the virtual space. That would advance us hugely. Imagine if you could take all that work put into Second Life and just put it through a VR experience. That would be unbelievable. But instead, what we've got is scads of defunct code, defunct objects, defunct scenarios. VR is a big, I'm huge into it. So I'll stop there because I could just keep going on and on. Its application, the empathy machine. And it's exciting to be here in the Bay Area. You've got Jeremy Bailenson, just down the peninsula there, who's probably the #1 expert in the world on VR. He calls it the empathy machine. It is truly a way that you can get in touch with humanity more richly.